partidul s-a născut.
Ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Țări pe drum știut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. E pentru că pe lume partidul s-a dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce-nseamnă ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. простяк, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И он продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Hello everybody and welcome. It is the evening of the 19th of July 2026 and we come to you earlier than usual with a live stream because I want to take in the World Cup final later. The England team went out in a blaze of incompetence against Argentina, so to be expected really, and then put in the weirdly best performance of the tournament to get in the third place playoff. There you go. So we have further World Cup news later in the program where I will be relaying the conversation that might have happened between Donald Trump and Harry Kane whilst playing golf. One can only imagine how enlightening that must have been. Now, we are currently live on YouTube, on Rumble, on Twitch, on X, and on Substack, of course, our latest home. And if you want to support the program and you can't get access to Patreon, you can take out a subscription on Substack. You can get the same subscriber content on there as you can on Patreon. I decided to duplicate it across there following a request from a viewer I didn't know that Patreon was blocked in some areas of the world, but apparently it is. So let's start off by saying to everybody, be sure to like and share the stream if you have not done so already. Be sure to subscribe on whatever platform you favor in terms of watching. Be sure to subscribe to the alternative platforms as well, because there's always the distinct risk that one day Keir Starmer's, well, actually now they're Andy Burnham's online shock troopers might shut some platform or another down. So be sure to spread your subscriptions as widely as possible. Now, let's just say hello to those who are in the chat so far before going any further. We have Akhmadovich Naz in Moscow. We have Speedy in Sheffield. We have President Jesus over there in Los Angeles, California, the land of Gavin Newsom. We have Terry Eaton over there on the Wirral. Good evening to you. We have Ekaterina Treskina, who says, Privyetski is Voronezh. So my guess is that you're saying hello from Voronezh. If I've or is Privyet thank you? I can't remember now. Hello to Wicked Witch of the Southeast. Hello to Anthony McKeown. And hello to LC1810 from Merseyside. Hello to Pradekan from Stockholm. Davey from North Wales. Paul, also from North Wales. We got James Goblin over there in the future socialist Yugoslavia. We have Jerry on the future socialist south coast of England. We have Mark from Belgium. Belgium very much in the house tonight. Red Fox says, go on, play the Internationale for the intro. Maybe there will be a new intro at some point soon. Hello to who else we got here? Gamer J over on Twitch, Rotting Henry from Chicago, ACDT from what must be a pretty sweltering London. Hello Alm 4655 from humid Shanghai. Zukos Boots says, bad day today. Weatherspoon served me burnt onion bhajis with my curry. Bourgeois swine. That's unusual. I know the ones I've been to, they're usually pretty good at the serving the food, at least. Whether the food's of any decent quality or not, most of the people who eat it don't care. Because by the time I'm ordering food in Weatherspoons, I'm usually half cut. So, moving on from such transgressions. Oh, and hello to Jesse Johansson in Saskatchewan. Nemo Yederman from North Wales. We got a heavy North Wales presence tonight, comrades. Good to see the North Wales contingent here. So, we will first of all get to our lead item, which is, of course, the resumption of US aggression against Iran. Now, this is of course, after the so-called Memorandum of Understanding, which apparently didn't have much understanding in it. So this weekend has seen the 8th consecutive night of US airstrikes on Iran and Iranian retaliation against American assets, military assets in the Gulf states and in Jordan. So Jordan now receiving Iranian vengeance as well. The US Department of Defense, the Pentagon, is admitting to 2 service members being killed, which Trump described as very unfortunate. And one is missing, and this is what they're admitting to, so it's probably more than that, after an Iranian ballistic missile and drone attacks on the US positions in Jordan. Trump has ordered a new wave of strikes to swiftly punish Iran and degrade Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. So whether he'll be able to do that, of course, is another question entirely. He keeps repeating his tired old line of Iran can't have a nuclear. I keep doing Trump as falling asleep because he looks like he is most of the time now. So the Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister, Gary Babadi, announced this morning that Tehran has suspended its commitments under the Memorandum of Understanding signed in Islamabad, which was supposedly a commitment on the US's part and Iran's part, but the US is the aggressor, to end the war within 60 days. And the Iranian government is now saying they're suspending cooperation because the US has violated and suspended all of its commitments, which they did almost immediately, by the way. And the Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei said that Washington's actions prove the US president's commitments cannot be trusted. Now, since the 26th of June, the US resumed the war on the pretext that Iran was committing ceasefire violations in the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump claims to have reimposed a naval blockade on Iran. Now, Iran has struck targets in Bahrain and Kuwait, including power generation facilities and desalinization infrastructure. They've hit the Al Tanf base in Syria, and July 2nd, Iran barred the IAEA inspectors from Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Now, the IAEA, of course, are noted for being filled with US and British spies, so there is a question over why if you'd let them in the first place. But they are now barred from entry, because why would you let them in at this stage? Now, the US Central Command, at CENTCOM, is claiming that they've got 50,000 US personnel now operating in the region. Now, this is in the context of a wider war. This is the second assault on Iran in 8 months. It was carried out during negotiations. The assault that began at the end of February, which killed former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and triggered the 5-week war, which led to thousands being killed and a sixth of the Lebanese population being displaced by Israeli aggression. Now, so the question has to be asked, well, why on earth would you believe anything the US told you with regard to negotiations, given their tendency to carry out bombing campaigns whilst claiming to still be negotiating? Now, the question here is, well, what is the actual US tactic? So this seems to be diplomacy as war by other means. So twice now, as I said, they've used negotiations as the anti-room to bombardment, so to speak. Lenin's point clearly stands, which is that under imperialism, agreements are only armistices between rounds in the same war. So the Memorandum of Understanding's collapse is not a diplomatic failure. It is the imperialist system working exactly as designed. Now, this is the post-Rumsfeld, post-George W. Bush war doctrine in evidence here. Air and naval power applied, attempts at a blockade, proxy and standoff warfare, but there is no ground invasion. The US can damage Iran from offshore and in the air, but cannot invade, never mind occupy or carry out regime change on the ground, and they can't open the Straits of Hormuz by force without risking their own ships. So 8 nights of bombing with no real direction as to which way the US is going to go is an expression of the incapacity of the US when actually faced with determined resistance. Now, the game here is, of course, the same as it has been since 1979. The US desperately wants to carry out a regime change operation in Iran, but it's unable to do so. It's unable to do so because the Iranians are, of course, unified, or the Iranian masses are unified in the defense of the gains made during the Islamic Revolution, which are, of course, a good deal of economic progress, cultural progress, educational progress, and also progress in the sense that the Iranian masses established themselves as having a role to play, not only in making the revolution, but also in its defense. And they're still playing that role to this day. And it is the rallying of the masses behind a line of refusing to compromise with imperialism, of unconditional defense of the nation, that has given the Iranian government to the necessary the necessary, shall we say, iron in the spine to continue resisting. And that's a very important point to bear in mind. And it's something that the US, I think, miscalculated over. They miscalculated over this because the president, in this case Trump, and his advisors believed that the regime change operation that they'd waged at the end of last year and the beginning of this one was somehow succeeding, and all they needed to do was to take out, that is, assassinate Ayatollah Khamenei, and then the regime would fall. And it didn't. Not only that, but they probably strengthened the Islamic Republic for a number of years to come. So, a massive miscalculation by the Trump administration. And really, they have no real way forward. They can't, even with all this talk about we're moving more guys into position. They keep saying they're going to move more men into position. They keep saying, "Oh, there's a Marine Expeditionary Group. There's this ship. There's that ship." If all they've got in the region is 50,000 men, that's not even enough to take like some of the islands. You need, again, I keep repeating the point. Those who believe that the US is going to engage in some kind of ground operation themselves against Iran are huffing like paint thinner or something, because the US just simply does not have the men to do it. It would have to scrape the barrel to find every combat ready soldier it could, and probably call up quite a number of the National Guard as well, then try to rally them somewhere and hope the Iranians do the same favor that fool Saddam Hussein did, which is not fire on them for the entire time that they're assembling their forces, as Saddam Hussein didn't fire on them in the build-up to Desert Storm. And then again, in the build-up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, Saddam Hussein was, if not entirely consistently, utterly useless. Now, the Iranians wouldn't do them the same favor. So they don't have the men. Even if they could assemble the men, where are they going to stage the invasion from without getting hit by devastating rocket and missile and drone fire from Iran? The only thing that they tried to do recently was they tried to do another invasion from Iraqi Kurdistan, which seems to have failed with heavy losses on the Kurdish side after the Iranians launched a massive missile barrage and staged a ground incursion into Iraqi Kurdistan to eliminate certain people. So the only forces they have realistically at their command are like the very foolish Kurds, who apparently haven't learnt yet that US imperialism is not a particularly trustworthy partner, and the equally foolish Balokis, if they lend themselves to US imperialism. But there's contradictory stories about that. Some saying they might, others saying that they rallied in defense of the Islamic Republic following the attacks by the US. So the forces that they have at their disposal aren't enough to carry out a regime change operation. The Iranians are very well aware of what the Americans are trying to do, trying to start a civil war, trying to divide the country, trying to split some of the country off. Then, if you manage to split the Kurdish areas off, then maybe you could insert a force into there and occupy a chunk of Iran. That the Syrian model, that might be what they're after. So far, though, it hasn't worked, and I don't think it's going to work either. The enormous blunder of Trump was to go for another direct assault and believe that his regime change operations had worked. This is not the case. So the Americans can't go forward. What they're trying to do at the moment is try to force the Iranians to make more concessions on an agreement that had already been signed. It is a political impossibility for Trump to sell this deal, this memorandum of understanding, to his own party and to Congress. So in order to get himself out of the hole that he dug for himself, they signed the memorandum of understanding in the hope that the promise of releasing funds to Iran and that maybe access could be given to Western markets, etc., and that reconstruction money would be coming from the Gulf, then maybe that this would encourage the comprador elements in Iran to force a split there. This again has not happened. Those elements are very weak at the moment. So nothing has worked. And this latest round of bombing will not work either. And so Trump is stuck. Can't go forward, can't admit defeat, can't find a win for love or money. So the question is, where does US imperialism go now? They're going to just keep randomly bombing Iran, because that will only lead to more retaliation and more damage to their own interests. Do they give up? Well, then they would be revealed as having pursued an agenda and failed. So you see, they're stuck, and they need the Strait of Hormuz reopened, because then this is a foolish notion that's been going around certain multipolar slop purveyors who claim that the US doesn't need the Strait of Hormuz anymore. Well, it plainly does, because not only is it the case that the US actually imports more oil than it needs for its domestic refining capacity than it likes to admit to. Also, the global oil price has a knock-on effect inside the United States itself. So the oil price goes up dramatically. It has a knock-on effect inside the United States and the rest of the imperialist bloc. So it needs the Strait of Hormuz open, the US. If it didn't, then it wouldn't be doing any of this. Some people have apparently taken leave of their senses and have started to believe that the US is immortal again. That is very much not the case. Now, so again, the US cannot win this without a full-scale invasion, which they can't do, without nuking Iran, which wouldn't be possible because, as Marius says in the comments, that would potentially trigger Chinese and Russian retaliation. And the Chinese, I would guess, have probably said that that's a large no if the US even thinks about doing that. So where do they go? My guess is that what they're going to try and do is wear the Iranians down by repeated attacks, supposedly during negotiations, by repeatedly picking away at Iran and hoping that this triggers some kind of split, hoping that this triggers some civilian discontent, hoping that the constant threat of bombing triggers demoralization. I don't think it's going to, because the longer this goes on, the more it becomes clear that the US cannot prevail. And the Iranian masses were correct in demanding a defense of the country and demanding minimal or no concessions to the US. So here we are. The US has failed in its objectives. They've failed to actually not only achieve regime change, they've failed to split the system in Iran. They've failed to have much of the civilian population rally to them. And so that leaves Trump up a creek without a paddle, so to speak, or running McDonald's without his loyalty card. Now, it's rather hot here, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a quick break between segments here, and then when I come back, I'm going to talk about the wonderful world of Andy Burnham. So stay tuned, and I'll be back in just a moment. Right, everybody, back again. So let's dive into the next segment. As I said, be sure to like and share the stream if you have not done so already. So we said goodbye this week to Sir Keir Starmer, a girdle in search of a personality, a bucket of pig swill that occasionally burbled vaguely human phrases like, "My father was a tool shed," or "sausage," at inopportune moments, a barely human bureaucrat in poorly drawn humanoid form. He is now gone, presumably to seek out more opportunities to work closely with Ukrainian builders. So the Burnham coronation is upon us. If you don't know who he is, he's a career politician who everybody says is different because he has an accent that comes from the northwest of England, ultimately. And I don't know, he's an Everton fan. So he has been subject to a coronation, meaning that there was no contest for the Labour Party leadership. He becomes Prime Minister officially tomorrow on the 20th of July. So he's the 7th British Prime Minister in a decade. That's the fastest turnover of heads of government in 200 years. Now, how did we get to this point? Now, I've covered Burnham and his rise before, but it's worth just going back to the starting point here. The starting point is that Labour has been deteriorating in terms of popularity for many, many years. I mean, in reality, they've been becoming less popular consistently since the 1950s. In the middle 1950s, the Labour Party had 1 million individual members and over 4 million affiliated, that is, people who were members of trade unions that were affiliated to the Labour Party back when that was how it worked. And so that was a potentially huge operation that rapidly diminished after it became very, very clear that the Labour Party had no interest in pushing for any kind of transition to socialism and was just interested in managing capitalism. The working class membership all fell away, and in reality, it's never recovered to the same extent that it did that it had in terms of members in the 1950s. There was that brief flurry under Corbyn, of course, which I was part of, and that got it up to around about 600,000 members. And then it just declined rapidly under Starmer. I always claimed, I mean, this just gives you the mentality of the Starmer people, which is Starmer says, "I saved the Labour Party." Yeah, well, from who and for whom? He took it from a position where it had 600,000 members to a position where it had barely 200,000. Decreased the membership by 400,000 and considered it a success. Decreased the votes as well. As I said in an X post the other day, Starmer won a apparently landslide victory with fewer votes than Corbyn got in his record defeat of 2019. Now, how does that work? It works because of the way the British electoral system works. The British electoral system over-rewards votes that are concentrated in certain areas, and it over-rewards winners. So if you get a particular swing towards you, you will get more seats than the proportion of votes should justify. Also, what happened was the Labour vote went down, but the Tory vote collapsed, and that's why Starmer is where he is. He's not where he is because he was some incredibly popular individual. He is where he is because, again, the other party just imploded. And when he came into office, it became completely obvious that he was committed to absolutely nothing positive, and everybody worked him out pretty quickly. Hence the dramatic decline in election results, the disastrous local elections, the Labour Party getting decimated in Wales, worst result in over 100 years. Terrible results, as always, in Scotland, losing heavily in the local council elections in England. So this is the nature of Starmer, a complete loser, a complete no mark. And so the Labour MPs panics and they bring in Burnham. Burnham, who promises to be all things to all parts of the party. If you are on the left, he's promising council house building. If you're on the right, he's promising to essentially not break any of the precious fiscal rules, of which more in just a moment. And he's going around saying, "Well, we need unity more than anything else. We need unity," in his patented northern charming voice, which I don't find charming because I know how much of a grotesque fraud he is. But all of the Labour left got very impressed with him, of course. Jeremy Corbyn, old man Corbyn himself, says that he's cautiously optimistic. Don't be surprised if St. Jeremy of Islington ends up back on the red benches of the government side. Do not be surprised if that happens. I mean, it'll make the Labour right wing will maybe shit a brick, but I think that I would not be surprised if in a year from now, if Burnham has delivered something, vaguely progressive looking, that'll be enough to kill your party stone dead. It's already pretty much dead. The corpse is still twitching. But don't be surprised if those independent MPs all rejoin the Labour Party at Burnham's invitation. And don't be surprised if that's a deal that's being worked on right now. Burnham's already given the indication of that's coming by saying that he's been loyal to every single Labour leader, including Corbyn. He didn't say that, but it was implied, and therefore everybody should be loyal to him. Doesn't work like that, Mr. Burnham. But let's look then at the economic situation, because Burnham's making a number of signals so far, saying he wants more devolution for the English regions. He wants public control over housing, water, transport, energy, which is a weasel wording, basically, because in essence, you have public control already over them. You have private companies running them, but they're regulated by public institutions, which actually set, in terms of the electricity regulator, Ofgem, which is a terrible title, they set the price cap as to how much the companies can raise prices every year, and it's always too much, of course, for people to pay. So public control already exists. So he's not talking about nationalisation. We'll get into why that is in just a moment. Now, what he's already done, though, is he's tied himself to the so-called fiscal rules that are in the Charter for Budget Responsibility, which is, again, like something that an HR director would dream up. And these people have no imagination, so it just goes to show how awful a collection of words that is. Now, what Burnham's committed to is sticking to the fiscal mandate, so to speak. Now, what that is the current budget must be in surplus, as the government budget must be in surplus by the financial year 2029 to 2030, and day-to-day spending must be funded entirely from tax revenue, with borrowing permitted only for investment. Crucially, from 2026 to 2027, this year on Burnham's watch, the rule tightens into a rolling 3-year target with a margin of just 0.5% of GDP. The investment rule, which is about debt, is newly defined as public sector net financial liabilities, and the fiscal rules say this must be falling as a share of GDP by 2029 to 2030, then by the third year of the rolling forecast. And point 3 of this is the welfare cap, roughly half of social security spending held under a preset ceiling. Now, the enforcement architecture of these fiscal rules is that the compliance will be judged by the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, which is, again, a completely unelected body created by the former Chancellor George Osborne. Again, the purpose of that body is to essentially create something which is designed to limit the flexibility of any government that gets elected by having this bureaucratic entity tell them, basically, well, if you do that, that'll that's against the fiscal rules. And if you go against the fiscal rules, it'll damage your credibility. And if you damage the credibility, the bond markets will sell British debt cheaply, and there'll be an attack on the pound, and there'll be capital flight, and there'll be the Liz Truss all over again, basically. So these fiscal rules, though, you'd think that they were all brought in by the Tories. They weren't. The most recent set were brought in by Rachel Reeves and the Labour Party in order to establish credibility. Of course, credibility with who is the interesting question. Now, the official reason for this is the need for stability, not burdening future generations with debt, and keeping market credibility. And the Truss period is referenced as a cautionary tale. Now, the design of this has been deliberately put together to keep certain big liabilities off the books, but also to make sure that anybody who takes office is immediately told, you have to service this debt, you cannot raise taxes by this amount, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, which basically confirms all the things that we're currently learning and going through in the Marxist state theory course over on Patreon and for subscribers on Substack. Just dropping in a shameless plug there. Because what all of this confirms is that these rules, which are set in bureaucratic stone, are non-negotiable in terms that it doesn't matter what a government or a party who aims to be in government promises. They'll be told by the officialdom in the Treasury and the Bank of England, no, these are the rules you have to follow, and if you don't do that, there'll be a ruling class revolt, basically. Now, we go back even further. We can see that Reeves has added to the fiscal rules, but she didn't invent them. The guy who invented them more than anybody else was Gordon Brown. So he came what he called the golden rule, which is borrowing only to invest, with debt, government debt capped at 40% of GDP. And that was New Labour's founding act of, should we say, self-abasement before the City of London. Now, Osborne, as I said, built the Office of Budgetary Responsibility in 2010 and essentially created another mechanism to overrule or try and overrule elected governments. Jeremy Hunt, when he was Chancellor, added to this. In fact, every Chancellor for almost 30 years now has built the same constraints and reinforced the same constraints on policy. Now, Burnham, of course, has a choice. He has already made it. He's committed to the so-called fiscal rules and to no rises in income tax, national insurance, or VAT. Now, so this puts him in exactly the same spending box as Starmer and Reeves were in, because he's already committed to essentially doing nothing to expand the revenue base. And so the only way that you could potentially do that then is by levying maybe new taxes. So this is why there's talk of like a land tax, talk of like a wealth tax, because that's levying new taxes is apparently permissible, but again, you would see a shit fit from the ruling class if you did that. But Burnham also talks a lot about, despite having committed to fiscal rules which will cripple his ability to actually invest, he talks a lot about investing and getting the economy moving and backing business and the usual collection of cliches that every government comes up with when they come in. But what he doesn't talk about, and this is crucial to understanding the dire state of British capitalism, is that Britain's been really subjected to a long-running, almost 30-year-long investment strike since the early 2000s. Now, in terms of private sector investment, Britain has been the lowest investing economy in the group of 7 nations. So that's the big imperialist powers, basically, the US imperialist bloc. But Britain's been the lowest investing nation in 18 of the last 25 years in the G7, and the lowest or second lowest in all 25. So this is like a terrible record. Over the whole quarter of a century, the UK invested barely 18% of GDP, whereas the Italians invested 20, the Germans 20.2, the US 21.1, France 21.7, Canada 22.6, Japan 26.6. So every other G7 nation invests a higher percentage of GDP in terms of private sector investment in their economy every single year. Britain is consistently the lowest out of all of them. Now, the interesting thing here is the question as to why. I'll get to that in just a moment, but the investment level has been consistently worsening over the last 20 years. In fact, since 18 years since the 2007 to 2008 economic crash. UK whole economy investment was 18.9% of GDP in 2025, and again in the first quarter of 2026 is still the lowest in the G7. Business investment specifically fell back in early 2026 to be 1.3% below the level of a year earlier, and government investment also fell in early 2026. Under Labour, then, both public and private investment has been going down. Now, the backdrop to all of this is, of course, deindustrialization. Manufacturing now is only representative of 8.6% of British output, and the pound is 21% below where it was in January of 2007. So Burnham is faced with essentially a long-term capital strike by the British capitalist class. So he can talk about getting them to invest, but, well, good luck with that, considering the Tories couldn't do it, Blair and Brown didn't do it, and now Starmer couldn't do it. Burnham's going to try and get them to invest. They won't invest. They won't invest because the profits are just too low. The rate of profit on investments in Britain is too low. The British ruling class would rather hold their money in banks or make investments exploiting labour and markets and resources overseas. So this is a very difficult thing for any prime minister to actually solve. Unless, of course, you expropriate the bastards, take all their money off them and say, right, you won't spend it, we will. Which, of course, Andy Burnham's not going to do. So you have this soft left reset candidate in a decaying imperial power with diminishing profits, with very low levels of investment, with an agenda that is basically just branding placed over policies from the Blair era of 20 plus years ago. And he's chained himself to these fiscal rules before he's even taken office, because that's what's demanded of everybody who takes office. You have to be you have to agree to the fiscal rules. Now, why is it the case that happens? It's because a lot of the British economy is based on just debt and speculation, and in order to keep the cost of borrowing down, and in order to stop a confidence crisis in the economy, every single government has basically had to reassure the bond markets who handle debt that the British government is capable of paying its debts and that the pound is still a good investment. This is what's going on, because if you don't have that, then the panic grips the markets, panic grips the parliament, panic grips the Parliamentary Labour Party, and you have a prime minister who's in difficulty very quickly. It's funny that even Andy Burnham, a man who's been on the right of the Labour Party for his entire career, but who's just now reinvented himself as a sort of soft leftist. Again, even he, though, and when he promises to actually do some investment and build some houses, even he's too much for like the frothing reactionaries in the Daily Telegraph, who fear that like house prices might go down as some council houses are built. So there is a broader point to be made here about the theory on the state, which is that this is what you see here. Is the fiscal rules being like the capitalist class's veto written into the state's own rulebook. The government has internalized the threat as its own constitution, with an unelected forecasting body, that is the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, holding the practical veto over anything an elected parliament might decide. And the lineage here is the indictment. From Brown's Golden Rule all the way back in the late 90s to Rachel Reeves's Charter, Labour's fiscal awfulness stretches all the way back to 1976. And the IMF crisis, when the IMF demanded cuts to government spending, and the Labour government all dutifully went, yes, sir, So if Burnham presses ahead with delivering more public investment, we can expect an investor's strike, basically, even more than you've had already. So we already have like a pathetically low level of investment. If Burnham tries to institute a new tax or something like that, we should expect that the capitalist class will revolt in their usual revolting fashion. So the point about the investment, though, is it's not a policy area. It's an expression of a class interest. British capitalism does not invest in Britain, as I said, because the rate of profit on productive investment at home cannot compensate with finance, property, and rent extraction. This is Giovanni Arrighi's financialization phase of hegemonic decline made concrete. Capital in a decaying imperial center flees production for circulation. Lenin's rentier imperialism, the usurer state living off the world market rather than building at home, has proven to be a model for British capitalism ever since, of course, Lenin wrote that. So, what is the likely outcome here? Well, the likely outcome in the immediate period is that there will be a flurry of positive vibes from Burnham, and then that'll be it. He'll end up as unpopular as Starmer within about 6 months, if not worse. So the point about the British state, just to emphasize it further, though, is that the state is set up to be parasitic. It's set up to channel money to so-called investors, to business. It's set up to guarantee profits to various different monopolies, and it won't invest unless it's absolutely guaranteed a return and guaranteed that the state will cover all its losses. So this isn't a capitalism which is bold and buccaneering and taking risks. It's a capitalism bogged down by debt, which is stuck in a deindustrialization loop and can't and won't get out of it. So all of Burnham's promises are just going to evaporate on contact with reality. And, all the northern accents in the world won't change that. Zero Bertino says, does McKay know we don't give a crap about British politics? Well, you don't like it, go elsewhere, basically. You can go and go over to George Galloway. I'm sure he's doing something interesting. Right, so the Burnham revolution, so to speak, will probably evaporate, as I say. Not a lot there for anybody to get excited about. I mean, if private capital won't invest and the fiscal rules bar the state from investing at scale, what concretely can Burnham do to actually stimulate growth? So his answer will be devolution and planning reform, which is tinkering around the edges. Now, what would actually happen, though, and this is an interesting question, if the British government simply tore up the fiscal rules, and is the bond market's reaction something that can be combated? Now, you could combat the capital flight. You could combat the bond markets dumping like British government bonds, etc. You could do that, but what you'd have to do is you would have to go to the masses. This isn't just a British thing. You could apply this to many different countries. You have to explain what is going on, and you'd have to say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to call an election on the theme of the people versus the bankers. Now, if you did that, that would make the establishment shit a brick, because suddenly they'd have to be the Tories and Reform would have to be out there arguing for being nice to bankers, which is not a vote-winning position most of the time. But of course, Burnham won't do that. Corbyn, I don't think, would have done it either. Because if you do that, then you're on headlong collision course, and none of these people have the stomach for that. So, watch this space. More on Burnham as we know it, as we see it. And we will be ready with the denunciations when the crimes really begin. So, few other things to talk about tonight. There is, of course, the scandal involving the Scottish National Party. If you've been looking at the Substack and YouTube page, you'll see that I did a quick interview with the former SNP whistleblower David Henry earlier this week. I went over to the Police Scotland headquarters over in Edinburgh and did an interview with him after he and Sean Clerkin, another long-time independence activist, had gone to the police to complain about the missing millions from the SNP. If you want more details about that, there's videos on the Decline and Fall and my own YouTube page. You can see interviews about that. But one of the things I wanted to raise here as an issue was it wasn't just, this is no longer just about Peter Murrell embezzling money. It's about millions of pounds that were given to the Yes campaign in 2012 to 14, being potentially misappropriated and disappearing, and why that was and who was in charge of it. So that's an interesting question, to say the least. I looked at the press conference earlier this week, did the interview with David Henry, which you can find on the channel. But an interesting twist to pick up on the question I asked David Henry about the link with the Alex Salmond case. This was then followed up on unintentionally by Tory MP David Davis, who used parliamentary laws over the fact that MPs can't be sued for libel when speaking in Parliament, to name Nicola Sturgeon, former SNP leader, former Scottish First Minister, as the leader of a conspiracy against the former SNP leader Alex Salmond. See, Salmond was charged with indecent assault all the way back in 2019, 2020, and took a long time to clear his name, but he did get cleared in the end. And then the case itself began to be questioned by various people. And it turns out that the case itself was dubious. A lot of the complainants were anonymous, and a lot of the feeding of the complaints to the police had been done by Peter Murrell, and a man now convicted of fraud and embezzlement. So what David Davis did earlier this week in Parliament was to essentially say the kind of things that we've been saying on this show for a long time, which is that it looks now as if Sturgeon, using Murrell and others, stitched up Alex Salmond when he was trying to come back again as an MP, and did so in order that their thievery could continue undetected. And if that sounds petty and small, well, that's exactly what it is. So let's just have a look here. Right, so going to be getting to the next segment in just a moment, but be sure to like and share the stream if you have not done so already. Right, going to catch up with some comments in just a second. Excuse me for a moment. Just going to take in the manner of the World Cup, we're going to take a water break because this is Thirsty Work. Right, okay, so hello to Alan in Georgia, that's Georgia, USA. He says, they really scraped the bottom of the barrel with Starmer. Who does he even appeal to? He's hated by both ends of the spectrum. About 5 guys who write for The Guardian. That's who he appealed to. That's why he was there. Hello to Cosmos. Zukov's Boot says, I have to admit, if Burnham made the Northern Chippy the national standards, I would approve. Well, yeah. I mean, if we're talking about like chip shop takeaways, Manchester's got some good ones. I was always a fond of the Atlantic Fish Bar. That's an official product endorsement there. Not really. Um, there's you see the classic um, chip shop chips, if done well, and getting them done well is a bit of a task. Um, it has to be like they have to be well sliced potatoes that are cooked just right. So like obviously the potato is soft, but it's still there. It's not boiled away into nothingness. Um, and like it has to be like a nice thin but consistent layer of fat all the way around it. Not like huge, like crispy pieces of fat which make you feel ill. There's a light but consistent covering of fat on a well cooked potato. And when they're served up, they have to be served up almost dry, so they're not like sticking together. Then, like, you have your fish, which has to be like, it could be cod, could be haddock. But again, it has to be like consistently covered with the batter, and the batter needs to be again like of a decent consistency. So you don't get just like a dry bit of manky fish surrounded by like 6 inches of fat. You get like a good amount of fish, like surrounded by a layer of actually crispy batter, not soggy batter. Soggy batter is disgusting. So like that, like standard of fish and chips, you can get it in Manchester. I've had it in Glasgow, to be fair. There's a chippy right around the corner from me where you can get that kind of thing, and good pies as well. So yeah, I mean, if he did something like he just turned up on TV and says, you know what, we're going to have a nationally run, rigorously policed chippy standard, which is going to be put in place by like a nationalized fish and chips chain, then people might have to reassess Andy Burnham. I'm joking, of course. He's not going to do anything that interesting. Uh, Hello to Sea of Kronos, Dingo Ate Me Baby over there on Rumble. Free Tanky Cat says Saddam was genuinely a stupid man. Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what the fuck he thought he was doing with that invasion of Kuwait. Given that you invade, you sit there, you wait, and you wait, and you wait for something to happen. You allow the US to assemble like a gigantic army, and then you lose within a day, or a couple of days, and run back to Iraq again, having barely fired upon the other side in the long build up to the war. It's almost like he was taking a dive, really, isn't it? ACDT says council housing is shambolic and corrupt in the borough I work for. These building contractors are siphoning everything from the councils for beyond shoddy repairs and inferior materials. It's a good point from ACDT. Even if you bring back council housing, which Burnham says he's going to do, well, how's that going to work? How's that going to work when all the building work's outsourced to dodgy companies? So what you should do is refound like council building and works departments and have the councils build them directly to ensure like a high standard of quality, rather than giving them to like cowboy builders and who are going to throw them up and they're going to fall down in 6 months. So yeah, it's a very good point. MKH 1976 says the Greens are pretending to oppose Burnham, but they would form a coalition with Labour under him. Exactly. Zach Polanski will be shaking hands with Burnham before too long. Spiral Alice, hello to you in the west of Ireland. Red Fox says Corbyn has a short way to go yet in completely kiboshing the Your Party entity. Not long now, though. I've said from the beginning that Corbyn's only aim was to return to the Labour backbenches. That's what he's always wanted. It's what he always wanted, more than anything else. Remember, he did not leave. They kicked him out. And if Burnham says, Now, come on now, Jeremy. It's time to come home. Just sit on back benches again and make noise every now and again, and say that I represent proper Labour values. And Jeremy will go, "Oh, yes, it's very nice indeed, very nice man," and that will be it. Your party will be over. I said it. Well, I said it 10 years ago when I wasn't doing anything like this, but Jeremy Corbyn's politics begin and end with the fact that he wishes to presumably die in office as a Labour MP. Maybe expire in Parliament. Wouldn't that be fun? But his politics are that he's a Labour man to the bitter fucking end. And even though he's been thrown out of the Labour Party, he's still a Labour man. Which is why he was never committed to your party being a real thing. Never in a million years. He doesn't want it. It's why, like, Zara Sultana, who, I have a considerable number of political differences with, but it would seem that she was a bit more serious in wanting it to happen. Corbyn wasn't. Still isn't. He basically just wanted to continue with his bullshit peace and justice project, and he wants to be back in the Labour Party. He's always wanted to be back in the Labour Party because for a man like him, he sees Labour Party as the only legitimate expression of what he would call it now progress. When doing an impression of Corbyn, it's always important to sound as if you've already fallen asleep. He sees that as like the only game in town and the only game he wants to be in town. He doesn't want to form a rival to it, not really. Your party will have disappeared within at least at the very most, the next 6 months. What is your take on the likes of Gary Stevenson? Now he's the self-declared money expert, isn't he? I've never watched any of his stuff, so I couldn't actually comment on it. So I will take a moment to look and then comment further when I've got more of a clue. Winston Fahrenheit says the ransacking of the economy started with Thatcher and privatisation, selling off council houses. It went on from there. All profits are private, all losses are public. A lot of it did kind of happen with Thatcher, but like the ransacking and the asset stripping that had begun long before Thatcher. That started as early as the 1960s. In fact, that's when it intensified. The outsourcing, the offshoring, the privatization, the parasitism, that's all been there since the 1860s and 70s with the decline of British imperialism, as Lenin observed, and drawing from the work of J.A. Hobson. Thatcher's just the logical endpoint of it. Hello, Dave in West Yorkshire. Alan Smith says, I hate how we're forced to rely on the whims of a tiny group of investors who are probably sociopaths. Just capitalists. Same thing, though. Nemo Yederman enjoyed my response to the troll. President Jesus says, a Brit who ignores British politics is a grifter. Indeed. And an American who ignores American politics is the same. Not that there's many of them out there. But never trust a person from perfidious Albion who spends all of his time talking about American politics and no time talking about his own, because such a person might be a John Oliver. Right. ACDT says Corbyn is too much of a weakling to even think of going against bankers. Yeah. Weirdly enough, Harold Wilson, who was a Labour Party right-winger and Prime Minister in the early 60s, he did make that threat when he first got into office and was told by the Treasury that the economy was on the slide and he couldn't do this, that, or the other. He did threaten to call an election on the subject of the people versus the bankers. And the Treasury in the City of London backed off for a few years. Didn't do him any good in the end, but he had more fucking balls than Corbyn does. Will you leave that door with a bare wood finish like that or ever paint it to match the frame? That's staying as it is. I mean, at most I'll like varnish it or something. But no, that's staying as it is. Well, I do like a wood finish. What can I say? President Jesus says, I remember watching Salmon's show on RT America. It was an interesting guest, like the actor Brian Cox. Well, this is the thing about Salmond. Like, God knows I would have had like loads of differences with him, but he was a sincere man in terms of his pursuit of Scottish independence. That much is said even by his enemies. Unfortunately, he seems to have been an extremely bad judge of character, given that everybody who succeeded him was not only not interested in Scottish independence, but was just a thief and or just looking to find a safe job for themselves, because that's all that people like Nicola Sturgeon were after. Um, and so he got screwed basically by his own party, which he'd helped build up, and then Sturgeon, who many in Scotland think is an agent of the British state. Who knows? I have no evidence that she is, and I have no evidence that she isn't. Sturgeon took the Scottish National Party from a situation where it had like 120,000 members, and that's in a nation of only about 4 to 5 million people, 5 million at most in Scotland. So 120,000 strong party in that sense is huge. But Sturgeon took it from that to less than 100,000, and it's been declining ever since. So she effectively destroyed the SNP as a vehicle through which any kind of Scottish independence movement could be active. And one has to ask the question as to why. Right. Fish and chips in London is almost 20 quid now. This says ACDT. Fucking hell. How much did I pay last time? In Glasgow, you can get, I think it's like a fish and chip supper from the place round the corner from me for, I think it's about 6 quid. Depends what you want. I mean, you can pay 20 if you go for like everything, but like your basic fish and chips, it comes in at less than a tenner. I mean, London's always been more expensive, but that seems just fucking ridiculous. I mean, like, London is just like you can feel yourself getting robbed the moment you step into it before you even spend any money. Zukov's Boot says, "Don't forget Place, the real king of fish and chips." Never been a big fan. Like, more of a cod and haddock guy. Don't forget Mushy Peas. Mushy Peas have to be done well, though. Let's be clear. They have to be done well, and they have to have the right consistency. If you end up with slimy Mushy Peas, you're on to a loser. Edward, hello to you. Pesho Nikolov, zdrasty. Hello to you. Edward says, what would you say to criticizers who describe you and the CPGBML as a romanticist project? Nothing romantic about this. Look, I've always been absolutely clear, or at least I hope I have, about the difficulties we're facing and the means by which we can go about addressing them. And I've always been clear that that is not an easy task, and it's a task that may take a lifetime, may take 2 lifetimes. So in terms of rebuilding Marxism and the imperial core, rebuilding working class power as well. So there's that. I wouldn't describe that as romantic. I wouldn't describe like what I hope is like earnestly and honestly assessing the incapacities of the working class movement as it stands is particularly romantic. It isn't. Now, the people who would say that would be people who would who in the past are people who would say, I know this is why we have to vote Labour, because we have to vote for harm reduction, we have to vote for the least worst option, we have to vote for this, that, or the other. And my response has always been, well, you're free to do so, but don't pretend you're reducing any harm. And it's generally what like all cynical reformists say about anybody who's still committed to Marxism as the science of the emancipation of the working class, and also that the emancipation of the working class has to be the act of the working class. Bureaucrats and cynics of all kinds don't agree with that and say that anybody who does is just a romantic, etc., etc. So it's a charge I'm very familiar with. Alm says, Arbroath Smokies with chips are underrated. Haggis, tatties, and neeps are god tier when done right. Indeed. I was introduced to haggis, neeps, and tatties by my now wife when I started going out with her, and that's why I'm still here. I was sold immediately on her and on Scotland. ACDT says the council should be in control of works, not these huge building monopolies. By having contractors acting as an accountability buffer, it's very difficult for tenants to sue councils. Interesting. Hello to Walter Stoltzing. Davey says councils do not have the knowledge to build houses properly. They are totally incompetent on this matter. At the moment, yes, because like councils have been systematically stripped of the ability to do just about anything other than collect revenue for decades now. I mean, there used to be council public works and council building departments. They were all sold off and closed down 30 years ago. So at the moment, Davies' judgment is correct, which is that they don't have the knowledge to just do it. They would take years to rebuild that. Burnham's council house building wave will all be done by private contractors, probably massive building companies who will do the same overcharging for these projects and overrunning of these projects and missed deadlines that always occurs with every single British infrastructure project. Every single infrastructure project goes down the same path, which is always misses its delivery point, always goes wildly over budget, and always like groups of like various different parasites, be they lawyers or management consultants or various others, find ways to siphon money out of the system. Just look at what happened with HS2. What do you think about MMT? Do you think it's more fair way to distribute wealth? If I get into that, we'll be here a while. Look, I think MMT is something which the adherents of which are very naive as to how capitalism actually works and how money is actually generated. I probably need to do a program on the Marxist theory of money. So I'll make a note. I can reply to your question in more detail then. Somebody asked about Paul Cockshott earlier. And I believe that the videos you're referring to are the China split or on uniting the left, and his replies to comments on unity. I haven't watched either of those yet. I will post a response when I've seen them. Jerry says, we no longer have bin men directly employed by the council. We do, I think, in Glasgow. The bins are still emptied by the council here. Scotland's a little bit further behind England in terms of outsourcing, but not that far behind. Rick says, Sultana held a one-woman protest to decisions of the Your Party conference by standing outside the first half of the inaugural meeting. And therein lies the farce of the Your Party project. Alan says, I'm very suspicious of Brits who make the conscious decision to move to America if it's not for marriage or whatever. Why would anyone want to do that if they're not sketchy? Exactly. Well, you move there to if you move there to get married, move there for a job opportunity, but there's people who just are uprooted from Britain and imposed on the United States. And there's got to be some kind of intelligence operation, but probably doesn't work because I can't imagine that Piers Morgan or John Oliver will make the Americans particularly well disposed towards the Brits. There you go. £6 for a fish supper sounds like pricing from the 90s. Yeah. It's £6. I mean, that's for it's a moderately sized piece of fish and a decent amount of chips. Again, you can pay upwards. You can get bigger for upwards of a tenner. So it depends what you're looking for. Winston Fahrenheit says the AI stock market meltdown and associated market collapse bring about the level of totalitarian fascism that Burnham and the ruling elites have wet dreams about. I mean, if it does melt down, then there will be some severe damage done. I think so. That's another thing to come back to for future episodes. Is another look at the AI bubble. But I will come back to that. AJ Williamson says, all the best award-winning fish and chip shops are in Stonehaven. Interesting. I have to look that up. Pesho Nikolov says, I recently went to London to the Bulgarian embassy with my daughter. My God, everything was so expensive. A meal for two teriyaki chicken in Wagamama and a beer cost 40 quid. Jesus Christ. Hexagon 4788 says, how to discuss with liberals who, when confronted with the fact that regular people's lives aren't improving, respond they should join the rentier economy, stock market, when people barely make a living. Well, the rentier economy is why a big part of the reason why the things are in the state that they are in. So I would say to that, like, well, how are you going to invest anything when you don't have any money? And there's one idea that's been come up with over and over again. It's never really been done. It's like the idea that we're going to give people money to invest in the fucking stock market. Fucking stock market's rigged as hell. You invest in the stock market or just get a side hustle and stuff like that. No, we want, and we should be absolutely clear that we want this for the right reasons. We want people to be able to live off the wage they earn in just one job. So they're not having to supplement it by welfare, not having to supplement it by doing like side gigs and stuff like that. No, we want people to live off the wages of one job. And you're only going to get that under a socialist system now. All these side hustles, all these investment scams, all that kind of shit, it's not going to lead to anything positive for the great majority of people. Edward says, is it possible that a neo-Keynesianism is established not on the basis of industrial welfare, but on BS PMC jobs and startup betting scams so that the consumer class continues undisturbed? Well, I mean, there's various attempts at neo-Keynesianism. None of them have worked. It wouldn't work in Britain because the productive base is so withered. Again, another interesting question on the possibilities of neo-Keynesianism. I don't think it's possible. Not under this system, not with the industrial base as withered as it is, and not with the amount of British debt that floats around out there. I don't think any of that is possible. Apparently, Paul Cockshott said Harold Wilson's Britain had the same planning power as Xi's China. Well, I'd have to go and watch the exact video. I mean, the British state used to have more planning power at its disposal. I mean, Wilson tried to expand the bureaucratic planning power of the British state in the 60s with the Ministry of Economic Affairs. So that was his like planning ministry. Never worked. Essentially, the ruling class resistance destroyed it very quickly. What's your view on UBI? Under this system, totally reactionary. It would be used basically to continually lower wages. It would be another state subsidy for the low wage economy, which is all the things like tax credits are used for. It's just a wage subsidy for employers who don't even want to pay like barely minimum wage. And that's all UBI would be used for. Zhukov's Boots says, ending centuries of occupation by a foreign power which has left Wales in a state where the majority of Welsh people can't even speak Welsh. In Wales, they've done better with the revival of the language than Scotland, I think. Because in Wales, isn't it the case that like all the children who go through the Welsh schooling system have to learn Welsh, at least to like GCSE level or like 16, like if they lose skill at 16, that they have to learn it. Because everyone I knew who went through the Welsh school system did Welsh at school. Whereas I don't think everybody who goes, in fact, I'm pretty sure that Scots Gaelic isn't taught compulsorily in school. In fact, you have to go to a specialist school to get taught it in Scotland. So Wales, I think they're doing better with the language revival than they are in Scotland. And that language revival's been going on a long time now. Zukos Boots is right in that most Welsh people speak English, but there are some serious enclaves of Welsh speakers. Well, we've got people from the north of Wales on the stream today, so maybe they could comment on that. Wicked Witch of the Southeast says stock market borrows to pay dividends to holders and buy back their own stock to inflate appearances. That's true. We didn't learn any Gaelic in school in Scotland, says Alm. Yeah, it's not promoted in the same way that like Welsh is. I think Welsh, again, correct me if I'm wrong. Rick says Welsh is learnt in school in Wales. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Welsh, I think, survived in a more widespread fashion than Gaelic did. Again, I would have to research the reasons as to exactly why, but it seems that like in North Wales and Mid Wales, certainly in areas which are a bit more isolated, a bit more rural, or were, Welsh survived as as an active language more than Gaelic did. Gaelic in Scotland, even now after years of apparently trying to revive it, spoken predominantly in like Highlands and Islands. Like, I mean, there's also like Scots as well, which is a sort of language system in and of itself. Yeah, so like Welsh has certainly survived better. Is there a point to learning Welsh? Depends if you want to be able to communicate in Wales. I mean, I think it's a good thing. I think in terms of like terms of development of not just children but anybody, like learning other languages is objectively a good thing. Like in terms of Wales, because it is quite widely spoken, I think it's good to equip children to be able to communicate with like their Welsh speaking brethren. So yeah, Davey, you're saying your daughter is completely fluent, having been through the schooling system. Edward says, can't the imperialists write off and just stack up and write off their debts? They control finance globally. So maybe PMC Keynesianism is possible. Well, again, though, like the imperialists have been weakened progressively by the fact that their economies have just become more and more parasitic. So they can write off their debts. Or if they chose to write off their debts, basically what that would do was further demonstrate to the rest of the world that the imperialists are basically just circling the plug hole. They can't even like guarantee their own debts anymore. They just write them off. And it would lead to a crisis of confidence in the international system, because suddenly, like, how is the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund going to present themselves with any remote amount of credibility when the people who fund it have basically just turned around and cancelled all their own debts and say that doesn't count anymore? I wouldn't put it past them, but it would be a sign that they are basically sliding further in terms of their power. This is the ridiculous thing about the current setup of late stage imperialism. Like, they can never pay off the debts that they have endured, which is why like all the stuff that you see about like fiscal credibility and stuff like that is nonsense. It's all based on debt and fictitious capital, and like you can feel like the squeeze coming, you know. So no, I really don't think that they're going to somehow manage to just keep this churn going. In the end, reality will bite. Now, I can't tell you when that will be, but in the end, an implosion of credibility of the dollar and the pound will come. it will take a while because of the they are so well established, but they can't just keep carrying on racking up the debt and pretending like they can never pay it off. Well, they may well in the end have to write it off, but that will be severely damaging for the credibility of their financial systems. The problem is that everyone wants a deal is a puppet of the West except the DPRK. Well, not every nation, but you see, every nation that has a capitalist class is exposed to the risk of comprodorization, so to speak, because every capitalist class wants access to the giant amounts of capital they can get if they do deals with the West. They want access to the markets of the West. They want access to the giant piles of consumer goods that are in the West. They want that Western capitalist lifestyle, and they are prepared to prostitute their own nations in order to get it. So the first step towards liberation in many nations will be to get rid of that layer of capitalist scum that is prepared to sell out, or at least isolate them and make sure they have no political power. Um, Sovereignty and language go hand in hand. Mind you, didn't work out for Ukrainians. Well, it's not just sovereignty and language, is it? Ukrainians don't have sovereignty, and their language has never been repressed. That's the thing. Like, the Soviet Union never repressed the Ukrainian language. In fact, it promoted it. This is absolutely ridiculous. This idea that like Ukrainian language and culture was suppressed, it wasn't. It was guaranteed a privileged position in Ukraine. The Ukrainian education system was like a dual language system. Everybody who went through it spoke both Russian and Ukrainian, whether they were more on the Ukrainian side or more on the Russian side. Everybody came out of that with the ability to speak both or at least understand each other. Government documents were in Ukrainian. The national anthem of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic was, of course, in Ukrainian. That's the first song on the playlist that gets played. It's the old anthem of Soviet Ukraine. So the idea that their language was repressed, that's just a flat out lie. There was a lot wrong with the later Soviet Union, but it wasn't repressing local languages or local cultures. Now, they don't have sovereignty. They have like language promotion and the ability to die in vast numbers at the hands of the Russians. Not exactly a winning formula. Now, the war, just to come to this and just to comment on this briefly, the war is not going to end anytime soon because first of all, the West won't let it under any circumstances end. And the Russians have thus far, due to the influence of the comprador bourgeoisie, which is all of the bourgeoisie in Russia, can't and won't mobilize to a full war footing to effectively prosecute the war to a conclusion. As I've said before, that would come with costs that the Russian government, Russian system is not prepared to bear. So that we grind on with gigantic numbers of Ukrainians dying, more Russians dying than have died than in any war since the Great Patriotic War. Far more than died in Afghanistan, far more than died in Chechnya. And this like cruel, blood-soaked farce will continue until either the West gets what it wants and the Russian system implodes, which I don't think will happen, or the Ukrainian system implodes and the Russians are forced to take over more and more of that territory. So this is the situation that we're in. There's the negotiations which Putin thought he was getting out of Trump aren't going anywhere. The Anchorage formula appears to have existed only inside Putin's head. Don't know what Trump agreed to. Trump probably doesn't know what Trump agreed to. But the point about it is that now the farce is being exposed. Trump is now absolutely committed to continuing the war, committed to continuing to supply Ukraine. He's just getting the Europeans to do the dirty work for him. Edward says the Russians haven't ever seriously attacked during this war. Even the bourgeois want a deal. Even when Ukraine runs out of people, the Russians will refuse to advance and look for a deal. My prediction. I think you're right, which is like if you there have been like slow grinding advances by the Russians, but one thing you notice is that like how contained this war has actually been, for all the fact that like, the huge number of Ukrainians and Russians have died. Like the Russians do some odd things, which is that the equipment that the West is bringing in to Ukraine, for instance, has to come either via road, which is risky or should be risky. A lot of it comes via railway, via the old Soviet railway system. Now, there was an attempt, there have been some attempts to blow up the railway system, but they've always backed off of it. So the question is why? Because railway systems are usually the first target in a war. And yet the Ukrainian railway system remains operational. Now, of course, they could be throwing everything at propping it up, but it doesn't seem like the Russians have gone after it in a consistent and serious manner. It's like the war is almost being contained to the Donbass with, bombings in Kiev and Odessa. But in terms of like going after and shutting down the supply chains, I'm not talking about bombing NATO countries. You don't need to. Bombing things as they come in to Ukraine on the railways, which again, the Russians must know where they are. The Soviet Union built them all. Ukrainians haven't added a lot to it. So why is the railway system still working? Why is it not being like targeted constantly to the point where they can't repair it anymore? Why is the energy system still working? The Russians put a certain amount of pressure on it and then back off again. Now, the key to understanding absolutely all of this is the nature of the Putin system, which is Edward is right. Our comrade from I believe you're Edward. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're Latvian, right? And Edward, you've made another comment saying Russia could blow up all the Dnieper bridges and circle the air around the river. East of Ukraine would collapse into submission within a month, even with this level of fighting. They refuse. It's another good point. Like, why not blow up all the bridges? It would be a hard job because a lot of those Soviet era bridges are very tough to blow up. But why not blow them all up? I mean, apologists for like Putin's inertia say, "Oh well, maybe they're going to go west and they're going to use those bridges." Are we seriously saying that the Russian armed forces don't have like pontoon bridges that they can use to ford rivers with? Of course they do. I've seen them. So why is everything being done with like basically half measures? Why not cut off, isolate, or at least cut off and try and isolate the Ukrainian forces in Donbass, east of the Dnieper River? Why not seriously target the railway lines? Why not seriously target the road transportation systems that are bringing in supplies? Why not do any of that to a serious extent? If you are fighting a war to win, if this was the actual replay of the Great Patriotic War, which Putin fucking claims it is, then why on earth would you not do anything in your power to secure the victory? Why, if Zelensky is, the resurrection of Bandera, which nobody really believes, the Banderites certainly don't think that he is, then why would you not be isolating and trying to destroy that regime? The truth is, and this is an unfortunate truth, that Putin and those around him, it's not just him, this is not a one-man show, there's a whole system, has spent 4 years using every military maneuver as a desperate attempt to get a negotiation out of the West. Oh, don't do this, or I'll reply with an Oreshnik strike very carefully targeted at one area of Ukraine. Don't do this, or we'll come up with some more windy rhetoric, which is basically like what the Russians do. It's like they come up with loads of rhetoric about the West being evil, the golden billion, they're being untrustworthy, and then they go begging for a deal. They've been begging for a deal for 4 years. The West won't give them one, you know? Um, and this is like a representation of like my analysis and observations over the years have evolved to the point where I can only conclude that the people like John Helmer, the man who, again, he's a long-term correspondent. I don't know if he's still in Russia. He might have had to move, but like, because he think he made too many enemies in the Russian capitalist class. But his conclusion, which is that the Russian government will not fight the war to a ruthless conclusion because they cannot fight the war to a ruthless conclusion and preserve the system of Russian capitalism as it is currently constituted, which is what Putin, as an individual and as a representative of a collective, is there to do. And this is why we keep getting this, what I'm going to call like the cruelest possible war, which is that you get huge numbers of Russians dying to do what? Preserve the parasitic and wretched Russian capitalist class? Because it's not to save the nation, is it? Because like, if you wanted to actually drive NATO out of Ukraine, they as Edward's comment implies, and as others have said, there's ways to do that. And by the way, the false false narrative that's put out there by some apologists for the Kremlin, who say that, oh well, if it's not this, it's nukes. That's bullshit. That's like the same thing Khrushchev used to say, which is we cannot promote revolution or cannot aid or agitate for revolution in the imperialist countries because then it'd be nuclear war. No, there's ways in which that the supply chains for the Ukrainian armed forces could be damaged. There's ways in which pressure could be exerted on that Kiev regime. It's not done because the Russian government doesn't want it done. They don't even want the Kiev regime chased out. Putin's actually said that. By the way, those of you who are rowing about languages in the chat, keep it calm or you'll all get banned. Okay? Don't throw insults and don't get hyperbolic. So everything about the Russian stance is about getting a negotiation and finding a way back to the West. That's what it is, more than anything else. Now, there are those in Russia who don't agree with that. That's true. But they're not in charge. It's clear they're not in charge. And by the way, to quote Gennady Zyuganov of the KPRF, which I regard as a very, very flawed organization. I once defined them as Brezhnevites, and they really are. But he said something which is true, which is that the Russian nation is essentially dying out due to low birth rates. So this is what Russian capitalism has done for 30 years. They took a nation that was heavily industrialized and with a growing population and with a relatively high level of culture, and they fucking destroyed it. They haven't destroyed it to quite the same level as the Ukrainian capitalist class have done. But again, these people want to be part of the West. So what you've got, this is why I'm always grateful for the fact that I am a Marxist, because it teaches you to dig way beyond the rhetoric. If you listen to Putin's rhetoric and the rhetoric, by the way, of his critics in the West, you would believe that some combination of the Tsardom and the Soviet Union and some one of the factions from the Sid Meier civilization games was being created in Russia, whereas in actual fact what you're getting is the same thing that you were getting under Yeltsin, just more restrained and more controlled, which is the attempt to form capitalism with Russian characteristics, meaning like a plastic layer of like Russian Orthodox Christianity is spread over like the rot of Russian capitalism. And because that wasn't working very well, then they appropriate the memory of the Great Patriotic War, which they insult all the time, because what those people fought for was that was a workers' state, no matter how flawed it might have been. They fought for what they saw as socialism. Is that what's happening now? Is Putin even really defending the integrity of the Russian state? He's doing the bare minimum to stop like the US plans of state collapse. But that's all because, again, like the Russian capitalist class all want back in with the West, and that is the overwhelming pressure coming onto the Russian governmental system is from the capitalist class who desperately want back into the West. They're not even that interested, truly, in like the long-term partnership with China. All of this explains why the war has gone on for 4 years. And by the way, those who say, "Oh well, if the Russians escalated, well, the West could escalate," it's clear now that the West can't escalate. They can supply the Ukrainians. They can supply certain weaponry. They can finance the Ukrainians, but they can't get involved directly. Not really. They don't have the capacity to. The British generals admitted as much. The American generals know it. Even some of the slightly more intelligent American politicians know it. Russians know it too. The US was never going to mobilize risk their own men for Ukraine. Ukraine's an outsourced army. It's supposed to die, which is what it's been doing. But there you go. This is not a war which is going to be won in the way that many of us, including me, and I made mistakes on this, imagined 4 years ago. It's it's a cruel farce, basically. It's a war fought by two sides for fake reasons, basically. The West side is completely fake. This is not about poor little Ukraine. This is not about sovereignty. It is everything about getting an angle to work against the Russians. Russians are claiming that this is like the next stage in the Great Patriotic War. Well, if it was, then why don't you fight it like that? The Great Patriotic War was full societal mobilization, and they could do it precisely because of the gains made in the Stalin era, in the gains made since the Bolshevik Revolution. Because even with all the problems that were there in a revolutionary time, the workers and peasants could see the improvements. They could see that things, for all the sacrifices that had been made, things were improving, and it was a fight against a vicious and cruel colonizing enemy in the form of the Nazis, which needed to be defeated and put down, and they did. Now, the US empire is more insidious. It's not as it doesn't have much interest in direct colonization anymore, but it's nonetheless dangerous. The US project is to break up the Russian state, to cannibalize it, to atomize it, and to devour its resources. So therefore, if that's the US plan, but the US is incapable of actually fighting directly to pursue it, then why not squash this regime that exists in Kiev and drive NATO out? Same answer comes up time and time again. They don't want to do that. They want a bargain. And it's not because Putin values Russian lives. Him and his clique are worried more about the kind of instability that would arise from higher casualties, because they know very well they can't ask the great Russian masses to sacrifice so that Oleg Deripaska gets to keep his yacht and Anatoly Sobchak's family can continue to enjoy the loot that they gained in the 90s. ACDT says, what's your opinion on former British West Indies colonies, now neo-colonies, pushing for reparations from the UK? Personally, I think it's a sham. It is a sham. Look, it's something which is designed to produce political pyrotechnics, but which is ultimately going to produce nothing. It's designed to cause a good headline for the Caribbean nations, the Caribbean nations that are involved, that are making those claims, and make the various prime ministers and presidents look as if they're doing something, but they know it's never going to be a thing. It's never going to happen, but it's good PR, basically. President Jesus asked, does Alex still believe Russia is mounting a fight against US imperialism? It is a fight against US imperialism, but it's a fight against US imperialism that is fundamentally compromised. That much must be obvious by now. US imperialism has been quite clear in its intentions towards Ukraine and its intentions towards Russia for a long time. My point about all of this is that the Russian capitalist class was forced into a war they didn't want and has been spending 4 years desperately trying to get out of it. Putin rhetorically papers over that, but that's the direction of travel. They're desperate to get out of it, which is why you have this like limited war, this strange these strange tactics which make no sense unless you view it as everything that the Russians do is the Russian government does is trying to get a negotiation. So yes, it is a fight against US imperialism, but it's a fight that the Russian capitalist class don't want to have, and that's why the policy looks as strange as it does. Pesho Nikolov says, I think they'll have a problem with Poles' mobilization to fight Russia despite the ardent Russophobia. Doesn't seem that Poles are too keen. Why would they be? Edward says, the irony is that the longer the farce in Ukraine continues, the more Russian soldiers will perish, and instability is inevitable in Russia because of that anyway. Yeah. This tactic that the Russian government has pursued, I don't think it'll even work. Edward, you asked another question a while back about what would you say to people who claim that the Western people are inherently reactionary based on history back to Hellenism, of supremacy, of pillage, stealing other cultural resources? Look, there are no inherently reactionary peoples or cultures, just as there are no inherently reactionary times. There are reactionary periods in history. There are reactionary political trends. And there are revolutionary periods in history, and there are revolutionary trends. So this idea that, the West has always been based on pillage and pilfering. A lot of places in the world, going back to ancient history, were based on pillaging and pilfering. Like a lot of old empires of the East were based on that as well. So Western doomerism, the West is like a unique criminal entity. I mean, there's plenty of criminal stuff that the imperialists have done, but it doesn't mean that the West and the European peoples are inherently and will always be reactionary. There's a lot of bullshit there, certainly true. There's a lot of cultural negativity that will need to be overcome. There's the legacies of cultural supremacism and racialism that need to be overcome, but those can be overcome and will be overcome in the end. Will have to be overcome. It's so there's no this idea of that there is inherently reactionary people. I do not agree with. I don't agree that the American working class is inherently reactionary. I don't agree that the English, Scottish, Welsh, or Irish working classes are incapable of doing anything. They all are. Or any other working class or imperialist country is incapable of radicalism, militancy, or revolutionary action. They're all capable of it. It's just that they lack the leadership and organizations at the moment to be able to carry that out, and often lack the level of political education to be able to carry that out. But all of this will be resolved. Ultimately, one has to take a view that the class contradictions will mount up, and eventually action will follow everywhere. And the rotten legacy of imperialism, the racialism, the supremacism, the phony belief in civilizational supremacy, all of that will have to go, and it will in the end. So no, I don't agree that the idea is that this idea that everybody in the West is always going to be reactionary and always has been, going all the way back to Plato. That's fanciful nonsense, I'm afraid. Well, Alan, I'm answering your point about my views on Ukraine. I've always been clear that if facts change, then I will revisit my analysis. And the more and more I learn about the Russian Federation as it is currently constituted, the more I became convinced that this is governed by a group of people who do not who are stuck in a war and are desperate to get out of it. But again, due to the combination of pressures within Russia itself, would find it difficult to just abandon it. So then the whole reason they got involved was because the people in the Donbass, those people who rebelled 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, forced the Russian government to do things it really didn't want to do. They didn't want to have to back up the Donbass rebellion. They didn't want to have to take over the Donbass. Now they can't withdraw from that without severely endangering their own stability. So they're stuck. And this is why, by the way, in the end, like, bourgeois nationalists are incapable of waging liberation struggles these days. Right. So I'm going to leave it there for today because I have to go and cook. But I'll be back again tomorrow, and there'll be clips from the videos from today and tomorrow put out throughout the week on the channel. So be sure to take a look out for that. Also, I'll be back with you tomorrow doing on the Patreon side, doing the program on chapter 4 of Lenin's State and Revolution. We can see it right here. There you go. And so be sure to join me for that. Program available on Substack and on Patreon for subscribers. So if you can't take out a subscription on Patreon because it's not available in your country, you can subscribe via Substack if you like. All right. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in tonight. Good turnout for a Sunday. I'm off to cook and then watch the World Cup final. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and good night.
Утреннего стяг в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.